I want to start with the specific texture of being new at a job. Not the first week, when everything is still novel enough to be interesting, but the third month, when you are past the novelty and not yet past the disorientation. When you are still the person who doesn't know where things live. When you are still copying the format of other people's emails because you haven't yet developed your own. That is where I was in October of the year I turned 24. Third month at the company, desk at the end of a row of identical desks, a mug I'd brought from home to make the space feel like mine, which mostly just made it feel like I was trying too hard. The company was a mid-sized logistics firm, not glamorous in any way that would register to someone outside the industry. They moved freight, managed contracts between suppliers and distributors, produced a lot of documentation about things going from one place to another. It was the kind of business that most people never think about until something they ordered doesn't arrive on time, and then they think about it briefly and move on. I had been hired as a junior accounts coordinator. My job, in the most reduced possible description, was to maintain accuracy in the billing records. I matched invoices to contracts, I flagged discrepancies, I passed things up the chain and was told what to do with them. It was not exciting work, it was precise work, which suited me, because I am someone who notices when numbers don't fit. The file I wasn't supposed to find was not hidden. That is the detail I have thought about most in the years since. It was sitting in a shared folder on the internal drive, a folder I had been given access to as part of my onboarding, in a directory I used regularly. Someone had named it with a project code rather than a description, which meant it looked like everything else in that directory until you opened it. I opened it because I was looking for a contract template. I had been asked to prepare a billing summary and I needed the right format. I went to the shared folder. I clicked on what I thought was a template. It was not a template. I want to be careful here, because what I am about to describe involves the specific mechanics of a type of fraud that I had no framework for understanding at 24, and which I still do not fully understand in all its technical dimensions. What I understood at the time was the version a non-specialist could understand, which turned out to be enough. The file was a spreadsheet. It had multiple tabs. The first tab looked, at a glance, like a normal billing summary, the kind of document I worked with every day. It took me about 30 seconds of reading before I noticed that the client names didn't match any of the accounts I recognized. I kept looking because I thought I had the wrong file. I was searching for an error in my own navigation, not for an error in the document. The second tab was where the thing became legible as something other than a misfiled template. It was a reconciliation table. On one side, invoices sent to a set of clients, with amounts, dates, and reference numbers. On the other side, a second set of figures, smaller, systematically smaller, labeled as the amounts recorded in the company's official accounts. The gap between the two columns, multiplied across what appeared to be 18 months of transactions, ran to a number I had to read 3 times because I kept assuming I was misreading it. The company was billing clients for amounts that did not appear in the official records. The difference, the gap between what clients were paying and what was being reported, was being redirected somewhere the reconciliation table didn't name. But the table itself existed, which meant someone had been tracking it. Someone had built a document that mapped the entire architecture of the discrepancy, with the kind of precision that only exists when someone needs to keep track of something they cannot afford to lose track of. I sat at my desk and read the spreadsheet for what I estimate was about 12 minutes. I did not move. My mug of tea went cold beside me. The office was busy in the particular low-level way an open-plan office is always busy. Keyboards, quiet conversations, a phone ringing 2 rows away, and none of it registered. At the end of those 12 minutes, I closed the file. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water over my wrists, which is something I do when I need to think clearly. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Then I went back to my desk and opened the file again. I needed to be sure I hadn't imagined it. Here is the thing about discovering something you were not supposed to discover. The first feeling is not outrage. People assume it would be outrage, or at least the clean, propulsive version of alarm that leads naturally to action. In my experience, the first feeling is something closer to vertigo. A sudden reorganization of everything you thought you knew about the ground beneath you. I had been at the company for 3 months. I liked the work. I was good at it. I knew that because my manager had told me so explicitly, which at 24 carries more weight than it probably should. I had colleagues I was beginning to like. I had a probationary review coming up in 6 weeks. I had, in the specific, modest, earnest way of someone who is trying to build something carefully, invested in this place. I want to be honest about the calculus that ran through my head in the hours after I found the file, because I think the dishonest version of this story, the version where I immediately knew what was right and felt no hesitation, would be both untrue and useless. What I thought about first was my job, not in a shameful way, or not only in a shameful way, in a very real way. I was 24. I had student debt. I had a lease. I had a probationary period I had not yet passed. The thing I had found implicated people above me in the organization's structure. How far above, I didn't yet know. The safe thing, the self-protective thing, the thing that would let me get through my review and pay my rent and continue building the modest, careful life I was trying to build, was to close the file and forget I had ever opened it. I thought about that option seriously. I want to say that clearly. For approximately 48 hours, I thought about it very seriously. What stopped me was not a sudden rush of moral clarity. It was something quieter and more inconvenient than that. It was the clients. The money that was disappearing from the reconciliation table was not abstract company money. It was money that real businesses, small distributors, regional suppliers, companies that were probably run by people with their own student debt and leases and probationary periods, had paid for services, and that was being redirected without their knowledge. They were not being defrauded in the dramatic headline sense. They were receiving the services they'd contracted for, but they were paying into a system that was reporting something different to regulators, to auditors, to whoever ultimately relied on those numbers to make decisions. The people at the bottom of that chain, the people whose money the gap represented, had no idea, and I did. That was the thing I couldn't find a way around. Not heroism, not a calling, just the specific, uncomfortable weight of knowing something that someone else needed to know, and understanding that the only person positioned to do anything about it was me. The 48 hours between finding the file and taking my first concrete step were the longest I can remember. Not because they were dramatic, they were actually very quiet. I went to work. I did my job. I spoke to colleagues normally. I ate lunch. I went home. I sat with what I knew in a way that felt, at the time, like the only available option. I made one decision in those 48 hours that I believe was correct, and which I would make again. I did not tell anyone at work. Not a colleague I trusted. Not my manager. Not anyone in the building. This is counterintuitive, and I want to explain it. The instinct when you discover something alarming in a workplace is to find an ally inside that workplace. Someone more senior, someone with institutional knowledge, someone who can tell you whether you're reading the situation correctly. That instinct is understandable, and also, in certain situations, exactly the wrong thing to act on. I did not know how far up the organization the thing I had found went. The folder was on a shared drive. Someone senior enough to create and maintain that spreadsheet had built it. I had no way of knowing who had access to what, or who was involved, or whether the colleague I trusted happened to be standing on a different part of the same structure. So I said nothing inside the building, and I went home on the second evening and I called my older sister. She is not a lawyer. She is a secondary school teacher. She cannot offer legal guidance, and she knows nothing about corporate finance. But she is the person I call when I need to think clearly, and what I needed in that moment was not expertise. It was someone to listen while I said out loud the thing I had been holding silently for 2 days. I told her what I had found, all of it, as precisely as I could. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "You already know what you have to do. You just need someone to say it's okay to do it." She was right, and it helped, even though it didn't make it any easier. Before I did anything else, I found a solicitor who specialized in employment law and whistleblower protections. I want to spend some time on this because I think it is the most practically important part of what I did, and because I have spoken to people since who were in similar situations and did not do this first, and who paid for that in ways they didn't need to. I found her through a bar association referral service. I called on a Thursday morning from a cafe 2 streets from my office, not from home, in case my home connection could be traced, which in retrospect may have been excessive caution, but at the time felt entirely proportionate. I told her I had information about potential fraud at my employer and that I needed to understand my legal position before I took any action. She told me 2 things in that first call that I have never forgotten. The first was that I had legal protections as a potential whistleblower, but that those protections were procedural, meaning they depended heavily on how I reported and to whom, and that doing this incorrectly could expose me to risks that doing it correctly would not. The distinction between protected disclosure and unprotected disclosure is not intuitive, and I had been about to walk into it without knowing it existed. The second thing she told me was to document everything, not the fraud itself. I did not need to build the case. What I needed to document was my own timeline, when I found the file, what I saw, what I did next. Every step from this point forward should be written down, time-stamped, and stored somewhere outside the company's systems. I started that document that evening. It ran to 11 pages by the time the whole thing was over. She also told me something that took me longer to absorb than the practical advice. She said that the question of whether to report was, legally and practically, mine to answer. She could tell me what the process looked like. She could protect me through it, but she could not tell me whether the personal cost of going through it was worth what would be on the other side. That was not a legal question. I sat with that for another 3 days, and then I made my report. I am going to tell you what followed in outline, without the specific identifying details that belong to the people and processes involved, because some of this is still legally sensitive even now, and because the specific contours of one case are less important than the shape of what happens in these situations. I made a formal report to the relevant regulatory body, following the process my solicitor had laid out. I submitted the document I had found along with my written timeline. I was interviewed. I answered every question as completely and precisely as I could. My solicitor was present for everything. What I was not prepared for, and this is the part that the practical guidance had not fully equipped me for, was the period that followed the report. The investigation was not quick. These things are not quick. In the time between my report and any visible consequence, I had to continue going to work. I want to say that slowly enough to land. I had to sit at my desk, drink tea from my mug, exchange normal pleasantries with colleagues, attend meetings, and perform my job with functional competence, while knowing what I knew, while an investigation proceeded somewhere above and outside the building, while having no certainty about how any of it would resolve. This lasted 4 months. I have read accounts of people in similar situations who describe this period as a kind of double life, wearing one face in the building and carrying another thing entirely underneath it. That description is accurate, and I do not have a better one. I was not, during those 4 months, the most straightforward version of myself. I was a person managing a weight that had no external expression. 2 colleagues noticed something was different about me. One of them asked me directly if I was okay. I told them I was going through something personal. That was the only lie I told. And I told it because the alternative was not available to me. The investigation concluded in the way that investigations into things that are actually true tend to conclude. I will not tell you the outcome in detail, because those details include identifying information I have chosen not to include. What I will tell you is that the fraud was confirmed, that the people responsible faced consequences, and that the clients whose money had been misrepresented received, in time, some form of accounting for what had been done. I left the company 6 weeks after the investigation concluded, not because I was pushed out. The protections held, and there was no overt retaliation that I could have brought a claim over. I left because staying felt, by that point, like a choice to remain somewhere that had required me to carry something very heavy for a very long time. The leaving was clean. I gave proper notice. I thanked the colleagues I genuinely liked. On my last day, I took my mug from the desk and put it in my bag, and I walked out. And the thing I noticed most was how light I felt without the weight I had been carrying for 7 months. I do not think about what I did as brave. I want to be clear about that, because I think the word brave gets applied to whistleblowers in a way that inadvertently raises the threshold for other people who find themselves in similar situations. Brave sounds like something that requires a specific kind of person, someone built differently, someone with resources or courage or certainty that most people don't have. What I had was none of those things. I had a spreadsheet I hadn't gone looking for. I had a sister who told me I already knew what I needed to do. I had a solicitor who explained the process clearly enough that following it felt less impossible than I'd feared. And I had the particular inconvenient inability to look at what I knew and pretend I didn't know it. That last thing is not bravery. It is just a certain type of stubbornness, the kind that makes it harder to live with silence than with action, even when the action is expensive. The thing I think about most when I look back at it is the question I asked myself in the 48 hours before I did anything. What happens if I don't? Not to me, to the situation. If I don't report this, the thing continues. The clients continue to pay into a system they don't understand. The people responsible continue to do what they are doing with confidence because nothing has interrupted them. And somewhere, in some future version of events, someone else finds the file, or the thing escalates to a point where the file is no longer needed to explain it because the damage is visible without explanation. I did not report the fraud because I was certain the world would be better if I did. I reported it because I was certain the world would not be better if I didn't. That is a smaller claim, and a less inspiring one, and it is the accurate one. There is a question I still get, from the small number of people who know this story: was it worth it? I find the question difficult to answer cleanly. It cost me 7 months of sustained discomfort. It cost me sleep in ways I have not fully recovered from. It cost me the modest, careful investment I had made in a place I had genuinely been trying to build something in. What it gave me, which I did not expect, was a very specific kind of clarity about my own values that I do not think I could have arrived at any other way. Not the clarity of having done a heroic thing, the clarity of having been tested in a way that removed the ambiguity from who I am and what I will do. I know something about myself now that I did not know at 24, sitting at a desk with a cold cup of tea and a spreadsheet I hadn't gone looking for. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the thing I would trade least. That is karma filed. Real decisions, real costs, real people who found information they were not looking for and had to decide what to do with it. If this story landed somewhere for you, and I think this one might because most of us will at some point find ourselves holding something we didn't choose to hold and having to decide whether to act on it, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave me a comment. What would you have done in those 48 hours? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next video.